You're standing at the edge of the scaffold. The crowd is all around you, but no one speaks. Not a whisper. Not a cough. Just wind moving through linen and breath caught in throats. You hear it before you see her, the soft press of velvet shoes against wooden planks. A rhythm that doesn't tremble. The footsteps of someone who has already made peace with death. Then, she appears. The air tightens as if the world itself holds its breath. She wears a gown the color of ash and blood. Gray satin, trimmed with crimson. Not royal blue. Not morning black. Red. The color of martyrs. The color of women who refuse to die quietly. Her hands are folded. Her shoulders are still. Her neck, long, pale, too exposed beneath the coif, is where every gaze settles. The very place her crown once rested, now the target of a French sword. She does not cry. She does not beg. She does not break. Instead, she smiles. Not a smile of peace. Not one of madness either. It is the kind of smile that unsettles gods and kings alike, a quiet knowing. As though she is not walking toward an end, but toward a beginning no man can stop. You can feel it in your bones, something is wrong with this execution. Not with the process, no. That will be fast. Precise. Clean. It's what surrounds it that curdles the blood. The fear in the silence. The guilt buried in the crowd's eyes. The king's absence, louder than a scream. You don't know her name yet. But you know what she is. Unbowed. Unbent. Unforgiven. The executioner removes his cap. He bows to her. He looks away, he cannot meet her eyes. Even he, a man who has killed for kings, sees it, this isn't justice. It's theater. It's a lesson written in flesh. The blindfold is offered. She declines. Kneeling on the scaffold, her back straight, her fingers tightening once around her rosary, she speaks. But you don't hear the words. All you hear is the wind. The soft slide of steel. The space between life and legend. Then. Silence. It lasts too long. Long enough to rot in memory. Because this wasn't just the death of a queen. It was the public execution of a woman who broke the rules, and paid in blood. If Anne could die with dignity while the world lied about her, surely you can press one button to honor her story. Subscribe, or stay silent forever like the rest of them did in 1536. Before the blood ever touched the scaffold, before the tower swallowed her name, she was just a girl. Sent away from home, surrounded by kings and courtiers, her future a thread no one yet noticed. But even then, she knew how to listen. The court of Margaret of Austria was no place for the dull or the docile. It was a place of sharp tongues and sharper minds. And Anne, still barely more than a child, absorbed it all. Languages rolled off her tongue. Philosophy shaped her spine. Music softened her hands while politics hardened her gaze. She watched women play power like a game of chess, and she never forgot the rules. When she returned to England, she was no longer invisible. At court, she didn't shimmer, she burned. Not with beauty, but with wit. With a presence that demanded silence when she spoke, that pulled attention even when others tried to look away. She danced not to entertain, but to remind them she was untouchable. Then came the king. Henry VIII was used to yes. Used to lowered eyes, open doors, and women who wanted to be claimed. And didn't open. She refused. And in that refusal, she became the one thing a man like Henry couldn't stand to lose, his own curiosity. He offered her jewels. She returned them. He promised titles. She declined them. He begged, then demanded. Still, she resisted. And the more she resisted, the more power she gained, not from him, but from withholding herself. He had never been denied. And now, he was obsessed. And was not a mistress. She would be a wife, or nothing. And that single line she drew, bold and defiant, cracked the entire foundation of Christendom. To make her queen, he would have to destroy a marriage, a queen, a religion, and an empire. And he did. Not for love. For control. And didn't just take a crown. She forced England to bend. To abandon Rome. To tear up its prayers and rewrite them with her name in the margins. She was not gentle about it. She supported reform. She argued with bishops. She demanded the confiscated wealth of monasteries be used for education, not royal greed. She spoke of the English Bible and the voice of the people. She was not a symbol. She was a threat. A woman who thought. A woman who ruled. A woman who didn't apologize for existing outside of silence. And the men around her, cardinals, lords, former allies, watched in horror as she remade the monarchy with nothing but intelligence, faith, and ferocity. The hatred grew. Because it's one thing to have a queen in a portrait. It's another to have a queen with opinions. They called her a witch. A whore. A homewrecker. But what they really meant was this: she dared to be clever in front of a crown. And clever women, always hang. She was the rise they couldn't tolerate. Because and didn't whisper. She dared. And in a world built by men, a woman who dares is already sentenced. If you've ever been told to sit down, be quiet, smile more. Then you know what, and carried on her back every single day. If you won't let them silence her legacy now, subscribe to Tale of History. Or go ahead, scroll past like the courtiers who watched her fall and said nothing. The crown didn't come with music. There were no celebrations in the streets. No flowers thrown at her feet. No cheers from windows, no weeping crowds blessing her name. Only silence. Cold, hating silence. And Boleyn was crowned Queen of England. To the sound of swords being sharpened behind closed doors. Catherine of Aragon had been beloved, pious, patient, and queen for 20 years. And then had taken her place. Or so they said. But Anne had not simply taken a crown. She had split a kingdom to get it. The Pope called it heresy. Rome branded it adultery. And the English people? They spat when she passed. To the nobles, she was a witch. To the church, she was an enemy. And to the people, she was a foreigner, a seductress, a destroyer of everything sacred. The wound between England and Rome did not just bleed, it bled through her name. But she stood tall. In a golden robe stitched with Tudor roses, crowned beneath the vaulted ceilings of Westminster, she held her head higher than any monarch before her. Because she knew, they would never love her. So she stopped asking for their love. She would earn fear instead. She poured herself into queenship with fury. Promoting scholars. Protecting reformers. Pushing Henry to elevate those with new ideas, dangerous ones. She didn't rule from the shadows. She ruled like a flame. But she needed one thing to secure it all. A son. It was the promise that had bought her everything. The son Henry had waited for, the heir that would erase all doubt. And then, it wasn't a son. It was Elizabeth. A girl. A disappointment. Henry did not weep. He did not rage. He simply turned his face away and did not return to the chamber for 3 days. And held the child herself. No wet nurse. No fanfare. She named her Elizabeth, not for victory, but for her mother. Still, she tried again. And again. But each time the child did not survive. A boy lost. A child stillborn. And with every miscarriage, Anne's body became not a vessel of hope, but a symbol of divine rejection. Whispers spread. That she was cursed. That she had used sorcery to tempt the king and was now being punished by God. That the sins of breaking Catherine's marriage had poisoned her womb. The nobility called it judgment. The priests called it prophecy. And Henry? He began to believe it. She was watched more closely now. Her enemies grew braver. Courtiers spoke openly of her faults, her sharp tongue, her ambition, her arrogance. The king's gaze wandered, lingering now on a pale girl with soft eyes named Jane Seymour. Anne's final pregnancy was cloaked in fear. She hid it. She denied it. She walked carefully, spoke less, smiled rarely. But when the child was lost, a boy, everything broke. It was the moment they had waited for. She had no male heir. No protection. No allies. Only blood. And the blood was not enough. Because she had been crowned with it, married through it, carried England's future on it, and in the end, it drowned her. She was a queen built on blood. And they would see her buried in it. They erased her from every painting. But here you are, seeing her again. So don't watch in silence. Subscribe, or admit the world can still erase women like her. Power doesn't vanish. It shifts. And when it shifts too quickly, it becomes dangerous. Thomas Cromwell had once stood beside Anne, an architect of her rise, a man who helped reshape the very foundation of the English Church. But alliances built in fire rarely cool into peace. Anne believed in the soul of the Reformation. Cromwell believed in its spoils. When the monasteries fell, their gold spilled into the king's coffers. Anne spoke of building schools, hospitals, libraries. Cromwell spoke of crowns, land, control. She wanted the wealth of the church to heal the kingdom. He wanted it to own it. And in that divide, quiet at first, then spoken, two ideologies met like blades. Anne still had Henry's name, but Cromwell had his ear. And he whispered what every king wants to hear, that the world could be cleaner, easier, safer. If one troublesome woman disappeared. She was unpredictable. Sharp. Too involved. She criticized policy. Challenged decisions. And worst of all, she made Henry feel less than royal when she disagreed. And now she had failed to give him a son. Cromwell understood how to kill without swords. He began to build something colder than death, certainty. A net of rumors, reports, shadows. He collected stories of glances in hallways. Misinterpreted gestures. Misremembered touches. It began with whispers. That Anne had been too close to certain men. That she laughed too loudly. That her brother, George, was often behind closed doors with her, too long, too often, too intimately. He twisted every kindness into seduction. Every brotherly moment into perversion. And where there were no facts, he invented them. Adultery. Incest. Treason. Witchcraft. Each charge more absurd than the last. Each one impossible to defend against because the moment they were spoken, she was already guilty. 5 men were arrested. Poets. Courtiers. Gentlemen of the chamber. Men who had once danced beside her, dined near her, protected her. George Boleyn among them, her brother, her blood, her last true ally. One by one, they were interrogated. Beaten. Pressured. None confessed willingly. But Cromwell didn't need truth. He needed spectacle. The charges were announced publicly. The Queen had seduced 5 men. Including her own brother. She had used spells. She had cursed the king's health. She had spoken of the king's death and the rise of a new ruler. She had betrayed the crown, not just in body, but in spirit. The court reeled. Not because they believed it, but because they knew it no longer mattered. Once Henry believed a lie, it became law. and was arrested in her chambers. Her crown was not taken, it was left behind, as if to mock her. She was escorted to the tower, not in disgrace, but in silence. No mourning. No outrage. Only eyes turning away, and doors that no longer opened for her. 17 days. That's all it took. From arrest to execution, the machine of power moved faster than breath. The trial was a formality. The evidence was invisible. Her protestations were dismissed. Her dignity ignored. She was no longer a queen. She was a warning. And the traps they had set, carefully, quietly, snapped shut without a sound. But she saw it coming. She always did. She was too intelligent not to. And that was her greatest crime. If truth can be twisted this easily, if power needs no proof, then how many others were silenced the same way? If you're watching and you're not outraged, then you're part of the silence. Subscribe to Tale of History, or explain in the comments why justice means nothing to you. The tower loomed, not just as a prison, but as a verdict. And didn't cry when they brought her through its gates. She didn't plead or collapse. But something shifted in her silence. The queen who had once stood unshaken before bishops and kings, now walked into stone like a shadow moving through its final light. Her cell was small. Too small for a woman once crowned. The windows narrow, carved not to let in sunlight, but to keep eyes from seeing too much. The walls were cold. The air stale. The only sound, the slow drip of water from a ceiling that didn't care who she was. She had a table. A wooden stool. A single candle. A Bible, worn from fingers that pressed it nightly. And the ink, black, thin, desperate, that she used to write. No one knows exactly what she wrote in those days. Some say letters to Henry. Others say prayers. Some say nothing at all, just lines of broken thoughts, words never meant to be read. But the guards remember her voice. Sometimes, they said, she sang. Not joyfully, like someone remembering something sweet from a world already gone. Other times, she laughed. Sharp, sudden, too loud. Laughter that didn't fit the silence, like glass shattering in a chapel. One swore he heard her speak to the walls as if they answered back. Another claimed she prayed aloud, not to be spared, but to be remembered. The women who came to watch her, assigned attendants, not friends, said she was composed, but distant. That she dressed every morning as if still queen. That she asked about Elizabeth, but no one ever answered. That she looked out the slit of window and whispered things only ghosts would understand. What she never gave was confession. Not to adultery. Not to incest. Not to witchcraft. Because she hadn't done any of it. And even if she had, she would not give them the satisfaction. Still, part of her must have believed it wasn't real. That Henry would stop it. That he would come to his senses, remember the woman who changed a continent for him. That at the last moment, a pardon would come. A horse galloping through the gate. A voice shouting, "Wait." She waited. She waited through the trial. Through the night. Through the morning. She asked if her execution had been delayed. She was told yes, but only because the swordsman had not yet arrived. It was not mercy. It was scheduling. Still, she hoped. Because what else could she do? They had taken her child. Her brother. Her friends. Her name. Her title. Hope was the only thing left untouched. And when you strip a woman down to her barest breath, hope is the last thing she'll hand you. But they never spared her. They never intended to. She hoped until the very end. But they never spared her. If her voice matters to you, then make this story impossible to silence. Subscribe, or explain in the comments why you'd let her die forgotten. The sword arrived before dawn. Not an axe, not the crude, splintering English kind that struck more than once, that mangled before it killed. But a blade from France. Curved. Silent. Meant for speed. Meant for grace. A final insult wrapped in supposed mercy. Henry had summoned the executioner days before the verdict. While and still prayed. Still begged. Still believed. Her death had been sealed before her trial even began. And when the foreign swordsman arrived at the tower, he didn't ask why. He only asked when. And chose her final garments carefully. Not royal blue, not morning black. Beneath the grey silk of her gown, she wore crimson, bright, defiant, unforgettable. In the language of the time, it was a color of sacrifice. Of holy blood. Of saints. She dressed not for pity, but for martyrdom. If she would die misjudged, she would at least die remembered. The morning air cut sharper than the blade. Cold mist hung above the scaffold like a veil. The crowd gathered early, nobles, servants, commoners. None of them spoke. Not because of fear. But because they knew something irreversible was about to happen. Something no history book would be able to wash clean. When she stepped from the tower, her steps were light. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had decided, they would not see her fall. She walked through the silence like a queen on coronation day, not like a prisoner. Her chin lifted. Her hands folded. Her eyes steady, not upward, not downward, but forward. She did not search for Henry. She already knew he wasn't there. When she reached the scaffold, she asked permission to speak. Her voice did not tremble. She praised the king. She forgave her enemies. She asked the crowd to pray for her soul. But buried in her words was a message deeper than any sermon. It was not obedience. It was not repentance. It was resolve. I die the king's good servant, she might as well have said, but never again his fool. The executioner knelt before her. A strange custom, meant to offer comfort. She thanked him. He told her not to be afraid. Then, quietly, as she removed her coif and let her dark hair fall free over her shoulders, he gave a signal, to the assistant, to the blade itself, perhaps to death. And when I give the signal, he whispered, strike. And knelt. She arranged her skirt with trembling fingers. She closed her eyes. She began to pray. To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus receive my, the sword swung through the air. Fast. Silent. Clean. Her head dropped from her shoulders like a leaf falling in autumn, beautiful, brutal, inevitable. But then, a moment. Witnesses swore her lips continued to move. That her mouth formed words even as the blood spread across the scaffold. That the woman who had lost everything refused to let silence claim her even in death. No royal casket waited. No velvet-lined tomb. They laid her remains in an old arrow chest, unfit for a queen, unfit for a woman, unfit for history. A wooden box meant to hold instruments of death now held the body of a queen who had defied a kingdom. The crowd left slowly. Some weeping. Some stunned. Some ashamed. But all of them changed. Because they had just watched not the fall of a traitor, but the erasure of a woman who dared too much, too loudly, too soon. And the silence that followed, has never really lifted. They thought the sword would end her. But some stories bleed louder after the body is gone. If you're still watching, it means her voice found you. So what will you do with it? Subscribe to Tale of History, or walk away like the rest of them, as if the scaffold was just another stage, and was never really there. Her body was still warm when the bells rang again. But not for mourning. Not for prayers. Not for Anne. They rang for celebration, because just 11 days after the blade kissed her neck, Henry VIII was engaged to Jane Seymour. 11 days. Not weeks. Not months. Not time enough for guilt to form or grief to harden. Just long enough for the blood to dry and the throne to be rearranged. Jane wore quiet smiles and plain gowns. She bowed deeper. Spoke less. Gave the illusion of peace, of obedience. Of everything and had refused to be. And Anne? Her memory was erased like a name scrawled in chalk before a storm. Every portrait, gone. Slashed, stored, painted over. Her coat of arms stripped from the royal ledger. Her initials chiseled from the stone walls of palaces she had once built. The Boleyn family was exiled. Her father faded into the countryside. Her mother vanished from court. And her daughter, Elizabeth, was declared illegitimate. A bastard. Unfit to inherit the throne her mother had bled to secure. The women who once mirrored her fashion turned back to softer silks, simpler styles. The men who had flirted and flattered her now whispered that they had always known she was dangerous. And Henry? Henry never spoke her name again. Not once. As if silence could clean the stain. But it didn't. Because fear lingers. Because fear lingers. Anne was gone, but her shadow remained. At court, no woman dared rise too fast. No mistress dared speak too boldly. They had seen what happened when a woman reached too high, and they remembered how fast a crown becomes a noose. The courtiers walked quieter. The queens who followed blinked more slowly. And the walls whispered. Because somewhere, beneath the gilded ceilings and velvet thrones, the truth refused to die, that a woman had changed the course of a nation. That she had ruled without apology. That she had fallen not for what she did, but for what she was. They didn't just kill Anne Boleyn. They deleted her. And yet here you are, bringing her back. So, are you the kind who helps restore the past? Or the kind who scrolls on in silence? Subscribe now to Tale of History, or type in the comments why you can't even do that. She never said her name. Not once. In public, Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, spoke only of England, of God, of duty. Never of the woman who brought her into the world, only to be taken out of it before she could walk. But silence is not forgetfulness. Elizabeth's entire life was shaped by a ghost. By the echo of a woman the world tried to erase. By the mother declared a traitor, a harlot, a curse. The little girl they called a bastard. The child who watched her own name be stripped of legitimacy, because her mother had dared to be more than a vessel. When Elizabeth rose to the throne, it was not just a victory. It was revenge written in gold. 44 years she ruled. Longer than any Tudor man. She outlived the bishops who called her a mistake. Outmaneuvered the noblemen who dismissed her. She wore her father's crown but never married. Never gave them a husband to control her or a son to replace her. She was queen by herself. Entire. Unyielding. And yet, she never spoke Anne's name. Not in court. Not in parliament. Not even in the carefully crafted letters she sent to foreign powers. To speak the name of Anne Boleyn was to invite suspicion. To open old wounds. To remind everyone how her mother died. But she remembered. Tucked into the band of her coronation ring, unseen by the world, but always touching her skin, was a portrait of two women. One was Elizabeth. The other. Anne. Mother and daughter, facing each other. Hidden beneath gold and stone, as if to say. You may have destroyed her, but I carry her still. Anne's blood ran through Elizabeth's veins, but more than that, Anne's spirit lived in her mind. The refusal to bow. The elegance of intelligence. The danger of a woman who speaks. Elizabeth learned not only from her mother's rise, but from her ruin. She ruled with calculated mercy and sharpened patience. But she never forgot the scaffold. Never forgot the price her mother paid for being too much, too fast, too soon. So she waited. And when she spoke, the world listened. The daughter of the woman they beheaded became the monarch they could not break. And died branded a traitor. But her daughter became a legend. And that was the final twist of the knife. If you can feel that, if it chills you, if it burns, then you already know this story is more than history. It's inheritance. Subscribe to Tale of History, and carry it forward. Because forgetting isn't just ignorance. It's betrayal. They say she still walks. Not in memory. Not in legend. In stone. In shadow. In silence. At the Tower of London, when the air grows thick and the tourists are gone, some swear they've seen her. A woman in Tudor grey, drifting just above the ground. Sometimes with a veil. Sometimes without a head. Always near the place where the scaffold once stood. Where the sword once fell. Her steps are soundless. Her presence colder than the stone beneath your feet. The guards call her the lady. Never Anne. Never Queen. As if naming her would summon her closer. At Blickling Hall, the estate of her birth, a coach drawn by headless horses is said to arrive on the anniversary of her death. Inside, Anne rides with her severed head on her lap, eyes wide open, lips still moving. At Hever Castle, her childhood home, they've heard sobbing in the chapel. Dresses rustling in empty corridors. A hand brushing along door frames that no longer open for her. Some say she's mourning. Others say she's waiting. But the truth? Anne Boleyn is not a ghost because she died. She is a ghost because the truth about her never lived long enough to breathe. They buried her under the floor of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, no coffin, no inscription. Just a name spoken in whispers for generations. Every year, on May 19th, someone lays white roses on the cold stones above her grave. No one admits who does it. But they never forget. Because something that dies unfairly does not stay quiet. It lingers. It echoes. It becomes myth because it was denied justice. And myth, like grief, does not need permission to exist. Maybe ghosts exist because justice doesn't. And if Anne Boleyn still walks, maybe it's because no one's ever fully told her story. Are you the one who'll help change that? Subscribe to Tale of History, or let the past stay haunted by silence. She was cut from the crown like rot from fruit. Stripped from the record, erased from the stone, forgotten on purpose. But Anne Boleyn didn't just die. She changed the temperature of a nation. Because when they killed her, they didn't only silence a queen. They rewrote what power looked like. They made an example not just of her body, but of her mind, sharp, unyielding, unapologetic. England never returned to what it was before her. She broke the church. She fractured the court. She gave the world a daughter who would reign longer, harder, and more brilliantly than any son ever could. But all that came at a cost. And in the silence that followed her execution, in the years where her name could not be said, in the rooms where her daughter ruled without ever once speaking her mother's fate aloud, you feel it. The price of speaking too soon. The toll of being a woman in a room full of kings. Was Anne Boleyn executed because she failed as a queen, or because she succeeded in terrifying the men around her? You decide. Choose the blade, or choose the truth. This is Tale of History. If her death shook you, wait until you hear the one they still deny ever happened. Subscribe now, if you dare to remember.